This week during Coffee Talk, it's the Super Bowl and Tom Brady. Also, management of farm data, almost as important as managing what's inside your grain bin. Century Farms and how to get that designation in Minnesota. And finally, a big segment on the hit and miss engine. This is the Rural Reflections Podcast. Welcome to the Rural Reflections Podcast. We've got Dave Nelson in Carrington, North Dakota, holding up the western end. Grant Nelson here at the studios of Thief River Falls Radio, holding up the eastern end of the broadcast. Dave, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Kind of getting used to the minus 20 stuff now. At least it seemed like that this morning. It felt pretty decent at 22 below this morning, but there wasn't any wind, so that helps a lot.
Dang right it does. We record the podcast on Sunday mornings typically. And last night I saw Kathy Erickson up in Holt put up 24 degrees below zero. We too had 22 below, just like you guys did. But it's darn cold outside. A little bit of wind, but not nearly like it was on Saturday. It's still a good day to stay inside and stay warm. And for some, they'll be watching the Super Bowl. Are you going to have anything to do with that, Dave, or...
I most likely will watch some. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and this guy said they were asking him who he was going to root for.
Okay.
And he said, well, I hate Tom Brady. And he said, but I hate him as a Patriot. So now he said, I think I'm going to have to root for him just because it's historical and this and that. So... And I'm not a Tom Brady fan either, but that's because Sarah is a big Tom Brady fan, so I have to be anti that. And so, I don't know. I guess either team can win, but I have a little gripe with Kansas City because of, I don't remember when the Vikings played them in the Super Bowl, but it was late 60s, I believe.
69, I think.
And so I have a grievance with them. I know it's an old one, but I still have to hold tough to my grievances. But anyway, so I guess if Tom Brady can win another one at his age, go for it.
Okay, two things from that. One, when you have grievances like that, it's when you get to be our age, you got to remind yourself every so often what it's all about, or you can remember the grievance, but you can't remember what the heck you're mad about. And at least that's the way it works for me. And then you and Sarah, that's your daughter, work together, and she's a diehard New England Patriots, or maybe even deeper than that, just Tom Brady fan, and you're not. So that must make for some quiet times every once in a while, or probably not.
I'm not as deeply committed to my team because I'm kind of a Vikings fan. They're just a joke, So, they really don't have anything to go on that they're that great. So I don't have all that much I can say, about the Vikings and compare them to the Patriots, So we get into it a little bit. I give her some hard times about her Patriots fan or being a Patriots fan, and so does everybody else that comes through the place. And I don't really have any bragging rights with my team. So.
Well, nothing else about the Super Bowl. At least it gives a personal opportunity to have some finger food and sit back, maybe have some popcorn, a cold one, and enjoy themselves for a little bit. Catch the commercials, and then, if you're like me, probably go to bed. Now, there's something you and I both have in common, and we like old barns. And the Minnesota State Fair has the 2021 Century Farm Program. It's a state fair and a Minnesota Farm Bureau. And to be a Century Farm, farm's got to be at least 100 years old and continuous family ownership for at least 100 years and at least 50 acres in size have to be in agricultural production. So it's really more than barns, I guess. It's the whole farm. But there's something to be said about having that farm in your family for a long time. Now, I was thinking about it. I think Mom and Dad got our family farm back in 1953 or so, didn't they?
I believe so, yes.
And Jamie, our nephew, is on the farm now and owns it. So it's on its way to a Century Farm, but it's got a little bit of time left to go. But for those of you out there You can go to Minnesota State Fair, mnstatefair.org/about the fair, and then go to awards and recognition. You can check that out if you have a 100-year-old Century Farm, or else you can go to the Century Farm Bureau Federation website. They also have a way to apply there. Dave, a little bit later on, we're going to talk about hit and miss engines, but can you tell us a little bit about any modern stuff going on? Say, I mean, how are you selling some things over there at High Plains Equipment in Carrington, or any kind of new equipment coming out that people might want to know about?
Well, you certainly don't want your new equipment to be a hit and miss type of thing.
No.
But I guess it's getting close to planter and drill time. So those new ones will start showing up, but those were sold, previously. I mean, they would have been sold last fall in order to be coming in now.
Yep.
So there's nothing extremely revolutionary excepting, the things we talked about in the past with AFS Connect and that kind of thing, and all these implements that are becoming part of a plan to improve every part of farming using AFS technology or GPS technology in that. So it starts with working the soil at a consistent depth, various ways, whether it be in the fall or the spring, so that when you plant, you're going to be planting into a same depth across the whole field so that you get good emergence and even. So that's what's kind of thing right now, although we're putting together a new baler right now because that too was bought early and has to be readied for haying time. But otherwise, I guess it's just all having to do with getting ready for planting.
When you talk about AFS, I think you talk about a plan. It's easy to sell a bigger tractor, more power, something that's a little bit easier to use. But to do that one consistent plan that's going to start at the beginning and probably not end ever, it's just going to be a continue on from one season to the next. That must be the tougher part, to do that whole plan and make everybody see that it's all one continuous line.
Yeah, I think that's a big task, and I think a lot of places they're searching for where they fit in to that whole thing, because there's a lot of outside sources that are trying to control your data. Seed companies want your data for themselves, so they can, see what trends are and that kind of thing. And so they're also in the business of gathering data and then giving you back some form of mapping or some information on what you need. The equipment manufacturers are trying to find their place, exactly what their place is in the whole picture. And there's all kinds of other things involved. The guy that's doing the tiling, he's involved, wants his part of it. The guy that's doing the seed selling, the guy that's selling the machinery, the guy that you borrow the money from for your land purchases, and all that kind of stuff is a part of it. So everybody's kind of working to find their place in the mix of all of that.
It used to be that just what was in the bin was the most important thing. Now the information on the server is awfully important too. Dave, let's take a quick break here. We'll do my online column. We'll come back. We'll talk about hit and miss engines right here on the Rural Reflections podcast. I'm Grant Nelson. This is Rural Reflections. Now, this program may seem at first political today. However, I think it'll end up more as talk about personal responsibility, personal freedom, and who profits when we lose any of those commodities. Hedge funds engage in something called short selling, in which professional investors borrow shares of stock to sell and then buy back later so they can return them, which lets them pocket the profit if the stock price goes down. It's essentially betting the company will fail. Last week, a group of investors used the website Reddit to coordinate the purchase of GameStop, which drove up the price, which defeats the purpose of the hedge fund. Investment platforms prevented their customers' purchases of GameStop and AMC to protect the hedge funds. This protection may cost them, as PC Magazine recently reported 34 class action lawsuits are now pending against Robinhood for restricting these purchases. Restrictions have not been limited to people who like to invest their hard-earned money. In recent months, we've watched the increased restriction of internet opinions. The right to freedom of speech should carry the responsibility of truthful speech, and social media platforms should have a right to control their content. However, I think the control of truth by one entity should cause those who enjoy their freedom of speech to be alarmed. Simply stating that freedom of expression, as confined to social platforms, is decided by a third-party fact-checker does not seem transparent enough to me. Perhaps we need no protection from the internet. However, the truth needs an advocate. Trusting social media to store family pictures and shared recipes is reasonable. However, allowing these same companies to decide the truth seems irresponsible. We've allowed another entity to be responsible for the truth instead of deciding it ourselves. The Liberty Security Balance says that the more you have of one, the less you have of the other. It may feel amazingly comfortable and secure to have someone else break down the facts and present them to you. Our culture seems to have an imbalance in that we crave security more than the liberty which was the goal in the creation of our country. It took centuries of cultures living under oppression for a few brave individuals to learn the lessons that led to documents like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. I'd hate to see that knowledge lost in a few short decades. There just seems to me to be too many entities that seek to give us as much security as we want. The protection given by investment companies to a few choice investors will soon be challenged in court. I doubt there's any legal challenge to be made by social media editing their own platforms. The one act you can perform is do the work. Decide the truth for yourself. It may seem like a lot of research, however, the freedom you get from owning your own mind is well worth the discomfort. Allowing someone else to manage your ability to discern the truth seems to me like slavery. It comes down to who owns your mind. The power of deciding the truth makes a major claim to that ownership. It's hard work to discover the truth. It takes time to read and listen and reason and compare. It is, however, very worth your time. I feel we're slowly becoming a nanny state with lots of security but diminishing liberty. Our government has remained in check. However, the last few weeks seem to show that private companies have picked up on this culture and are gradually enforcing their will. It's what happens when the nanny begins to like his or her power a bit too much. I'm Grant Nelson. This is Rural Reflections. Welcome back to the Real Reflections podcast. Now, in the first half, we talked about newer equipment. We want to talk about older equipment here in the second half. Dave, the hit and miss engine, I was thinking about how to describe that to people, but the best thing I can probably think of is to mimic the sound. It's kind of like that kind of. It's got that.
Wow.
Does it sound
good?
Do you feel like you're at Rolog or you're at New Rockford during the Steam get together?
I felt that right there. Yeah.
Basically, the hit and miss is an engine. If I can correct me if I'm wrong, and I would sure think I would be, Dave. But the hit and miss engine is basically an engine that only ignites the fuel gas mixture when the RPM gets low enough to a predetermined level that it feels it needs to speed the RPM up again. And a lot of it depends on the flywheel. Is that kind of it in a nutshell?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's just a matter of how much inertia you have in that flywheel to keep it moving. And, of course, then it gives off either one big bang, or if it's pulling real hard, then they'll fire more than that one big bang and then coast,
Yep.
It's kind of cool to listen to them when they start pulling, because they go from a single blast to sounding more like an engine that we know of nowadays, that is firing on every compression. But yeah, they're kind of a cool little engine. They have an awful lot of usage, before electricity was around. They're highly sought after by collectors, but things have kind of changed in the collector world on that. You used to be able to, you used to have to pay $200, $300, $400 for one that wasn't running, and then you went and fixed it up yourself. And now, a lot of the people that have collected them in the past are either, selling their stuff on estate sales or can't manage it anymore, so they're getting rid of it somehow. And you'll see a lot of that stuff on auction sales where somebody has collected that stuff, and a lot of those are pretty good running little engines right now, and they're getting them quite reasonable. So if you want to get in on the hit and miss engine thing, if it's a common engine, which there was a lot of them built, you could probably get one pretty cheap. I think the rare ones, they're still bringing big money, but the little International was really an odd looking little engine. It looked like a cast iron block with a pulley on it, and it was very dependable. And there was one for the water pump and one for the grain auger and one for this and one for that. At the time, and now a lot of people have multiples of them, but they just were a dependable little means of getting some work done.
And some of the names I found, Stover, Hercules, of course, International Harvester, John Deere, Maytag, and Fairbanks Morse. Maytag, I've heard a lot of use as far as household, of course, for washers, but other things. And I've also seen some hit and miss engines on wheels so that they could be taken from one job to the next, I suppose, just so they didn't have to have so many engines on the farm.
I imagine, and there's some huge ones. I think there's a Hornsby was one that was a pretty common one, like in elevators and stuff, grain elevators. Sure. And Fairbanks Morse was also. But some of those were big. And if you go to the Rolog show or some of them, they'll have a whole building built around these big single-cylinder, and some are even twin hit-and-miss engines. And quite a few of them were diesel when they were in elevators and that. So there you can get some of the effect of that. You walk by one of these big stationary engines that's mounted on a cement pad at a steam show, that when it fires, you'll jump.
Yeah. I can imagine. I mean, when you think about a 4 or 5 horsepower smaller hit and miss engine, that'll make you jump a little bit if you're not ready for it. I can imagine a much larger one would be even greater. I've seen a lot of trailers full of hit and miss engines, and you were telling me a couple days, or no, just last night, as a matter of fact, about a kind of innovative way of presenting these hit and miss engines that you saw at a steam show. Was it in Carrington or North Dakota, or New Rockford rather?
Yeah, it was in New Rockford. There was a guy that mounted his collection of steam engines on a hay rack, and then he put an axle under this hay rack that you could steer, and then he took some kind of a truck axle and put underneath it, and he belt drove the differential on that rear axle directly from the little stationary engine, and then he would drive that in a parade, and it was kind of a risky adventure for him, because steering a hay rack with homemade steering mechanism and a belt tightener to drive it got a little hairy for him. But he drove it around through the parade every year, and he'd have all his engines on there running and just shaking the heck out of that hay rack. And I don't know whatever happened to that stuff. I know it was sold at his auction sale after he passed away, but he was quite a unique act there at the steam show with all those stationary engines running on his hay rack, on his motorized hay rack.
It's amazing. People who are pretty risk averse, the amount of chance and risk they'll take in the pursuit of a hobby, it's incredible. I've been there myself, and it sounds like that old gentleman was very similar. Dave, you got anything else for us this week?
No, I'm just waiting to see finally draw the line on the cold weather, because we were supposed to warm up towards the end of next week, and they removed that now from the weather forecast. So I think we're going to have our January cold snap in February.
Well, that's not something to look forward to, but after February usually comes a pretty warm month, so we can look forward to that. Dave, tell everyone hello out in Carrington, would you?
I will do that.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. There he is, my brother Dave, out in Carrington, North Dakota. I'm Grant Nelson here at the studios of Thief River Falls Radio, and this is the Rural Reflections Podcast.